Oh. Oh, my dear. I'm so sorry. I really do hope that that gets figured out for you, one way or another. Why, yes, I do, in fact, have a Discord. Um, let me... Of course you would get ads right now. So, that right there is my card information. It has all of the socials on it, including my Discord. Well, hello, Looney Neptune. Thank you so much for popping in. Alright. Well, I don't see a Discord. There should be one. Do I really not have my Discord on there? Huh. I'll need to fix that then. Thank you so much. That should be an invitation to my Discord. I'm so sorry about that. I'll need to fix that. But with all of that being said, I do believe now it is time for us to continue our readings. And in a fun turn of events, things have been changed up a little for the holiday coming up. I do hope you enjoy my ball attire. I worked so long on it. Now, a little bit of bookkeeping before we continue on. I was scheduled to have a collaboration. Oh, yes, Fall. It is a new look. It is for this wonderful month and kind of spookier season. Now, I was scheduled to have a collaboration with a few other of my friends. Over at Plink Small Craw's channel, just a few moments after this. But I'm afraid that a family matter has come up and I will be unable to go to that. But I will be able to squeeze in this small reading before I have to go to the family thing. So, with all of that being said, how does everything sound? How does everything look? I want to make sure that you're as comfortable as possible before I begin. I may be exceptionally curious about how the audio sounds for y'all, as I have changed up a few things with my setup in the hopes that it will make everything sound so much better for everyone. But, with all of that said, we shall now begin our readings of A Treasury of Irish Fairy and Folk Tales. And we are still within the Troping Fairies segment. Our next story is called The Farmer's Wife by Lady Wilde. Down in the south, there lived a rich farmer and his wife, who were both of them hated by the people for their stingy, hard-hearted ways. Never a word of kindness was on their lips. Never a blessing from the poor was invoked on their heads. One day, an old woman came to the door to beg a little food, a cake from the griddle, or a few potatoes, or a handful of meal, but she was harshly refused by the farmer's wife and turned away. Then she came back in a little while and begged for a drink of milk, for she was faint and weary, she said, and had traveled far. This was also refused, and she was ordered to leave the place at once. But the woman still begged hard for leave to rest herself a little, and for even a drink of buttermilk, for it was the churning day, and she knew that there must be plenty in the house. Ah, thank you, Looney Neptune, for the compliment. Now, where was I? Then the farmer's wife grew very angry, and she said she would turn the dogs on her if she didn't go away, and that no tramp should get anything from her. On this, the woman muttered some words, with her hand on the lintel of the door, and then she went her way. Ah, hello, Sean. Thank you so much for commenting. It is a pleasure to meet you. Soon after, being much heated by the violence of her anger, the farmer's wife went to the dairy for a drink. But as she poured out the draught, she saw something black in the cup, and she tried to take it out with her finger, but it always escaped her. Then, being very thirsty, she drank of the milk, and still another and another cup. And in the drinking, the black object disappeared. That night, however, she fell nigh to death, for her body began to swell and turned black all over. Medical aid was sent for, but the doctor could make out nothing of the cause or nature of the strange disease. Then the priest was summoned, and he at once, having heard the story, said there was witchcraft in it. He proceeded to pray and to exorcise the evil spirit in the woman. Besides this, he made her be placed in a hot bath, into which he poured some holy water. At first the woman uttered fierce cries, and said her body seemed rent and torn. But gradually she became calmer, and the blackness slowly went down from head to feet, and finally disappeared. leaving the body fair and whole, all except one hand, which this remained still as black as ink. The holy water was poured on it, and the priest prayed, but nothing would remove the devil's mark. So the priest told her at last that the blackness would remain as a sign and token of her sins against the poor. And from that day forth to her death, the mark of the evil spell remained on her. But she grew kinder to the poor, for her heart was shaken by terror. And when she came to die, there was no blackness on her hand, for the tears of the poor she had succored and befriended had washed all the devil's mark away before the moment came when her soul was to appear before God. Ah, thank you so much for the little biddies, Sean. That's so very sweet of you. And thank you for lurking, Game Crazy. My. People would think that others would grow to be far more courteous to their companions after hearing all of these stories. But there were parts that rang true in this story. Or rang familiar, pardon me, in this story and the one from last time. But let's just see what things go from there. Ah, I see you've redeemed a posture check and a hydrate, Sean. Thank you so much. Mm. I've now had a good swig of my drink, and thank you once again for the posture check. Since I am not wearing my corset at this time, it is always nice to be reminded. The next story is called The Fairy Thorn. It is an Ulster ballad credited by Sir Samuel Ferguson. It is quite a long ballad, it would seem. Get up, our Anna dear, from the weary spinning wheel, for your father's on the hill, and your mother is asleep. Come up above the crags, and we'll dance a Highland reel around the fairy thorn on the steep. At Anna's grey store, 'twas thus the maidens cried, 3 merry maidens fair, in kirtles of the green. And Anna laid the rock and the weary wheel aside, the fairest of the 4, I ween. There glancing through the glimmer of a quiet eve, away in milky weavings of neck and ankle bare, the heavy sliding steam in its sleepy song they leave, and the crags in the ghostly air. and linking hand in hand, and singing as they go. The maids along the hillside had taken their fearless way, till they come to where the rowan trees and lonely beauty grow, beside the fairy hawthorn gray. The hawthorn stands between the ashes tall and slim, like matron with her twin granddaughters at her knee. The rowan berries cluster over her head, gray and dim, in ruddy kisses sweet to see. The merry maidens four have ranged them in a row, between each lovely couple a stately rowan stem. And away in mazes wavy, like skimming birds they go. Oh, never caroled bird like them. But solemn is the silence of the silvery haze. The drinks away their voices in echoless repose, and dreamily the evening was stilled the haunting braes, and dreamier the gloaming grows. And sinking one by one, like lark notes from the sky, are hushed when the falcon's shadow saileth across the open shaw, are hushed the maidens' voices, as cowering down they lay, in the flutter of their sudden awe. For from the air above, and the grassy ground beneath, and from the mountain ashes that the white, old white thorn between, a power of faint enchantment doth through their being breathe, and they sink down together on the green. They sink together in silence, and stealing side by side, they fling their lovely arms over the drooping necks so fair, then vainly strive again their naked arms to hide, for their shrinking necks again are bare. Thus clasped and prostrate all, with their heads together bowed, soft o'er their bosoms beating the only human sound, they hear the silky footsteps of the silent fairy crowd, like a river in the air gliding round. No scream can any raise, no prayer can any say, but wild, wild the terror of the speechless three. For they feel fair Anna Grace drawn silently away, by whom they dare not to see. They feel the tresses twine with her parting locks of gold, and the curls elastic falling from her head withdraws. They feel her sliding arms from their tranced arms unfold, that they may not look to see the cause. For heavy on their senses the faint enchantment lies. Through all the night of anguish and perilous amaze, neither fear nor wonder can ope their quivering eyes, or their limbs from the cold ground raise. Till out of night the earth had rolled her dewy side, with every haunted mountain and steaming vale below, when, as the mist disappears in the yellow morning tide, the maiden's trance dissolveth so, then fly the ghastly three as swiftly as they may, and tell their tale of sorrow to anxious friends in vain. They pined away and died within a year and a day, and never was Anna Grace seen again. This next story is called The Fairy Dance by Lady Wilde. We have many accreditations to Lady Wilde so far. One evening, late in November, which is the month when spirits have most power over all things, as the prettiest girl in all the island was going to the well for water, her foot slipped and she fell. It was an unlucky omen, and when she got up and looked around, it seemed to her as if she were in a strange place, and all around her had changed as if by enchantment. But at some distance she saw a great crowd gathered round a blazing fire, and she was drawn slowly on toward them, till at last she stood in the midst of people, but they kept silence, looking fixedly at her, and she was afraid, and tried to turn and leave them, but she could not. Then a beautiful youth, like a prince, with a red sash and a golden band on his long yellow hair, came up and asked her to dance. "It is a foolish thing of you, sir, to ask me to dance," she said, "when there is no music." Then he lifted his hand and made a sign to the people, and instantly the sweetest music sounded near her and around her, and the young man took her hand, and they danced and danced till the moon and the stars went down. But she seemed like one floating on the air, and she forgot everything in the world except the dancing, and the sweet low music, and her beautiful partner. At last the dancing ceased, and her partner thanked her and invited her to supper with the company. Then she saw an opening in the ground and a flight of steps, and the young man, who seemed to be the king amongst them all, led her down, followed by the whole company. At the end of the stairs they came upon a large hall, all bright and beautiful with gold and silver and lights, and the table was covered with everything good to eat, and wine was poured out in golden cups for them to drink. When she sat down, they all pressed her to eat the food and drink the wine. And as she was weary after the dancing, she took the golden cup the prince passed to her and raised it to her lips to drink. Just then, a man passed close to her and whispered her, "Eat no food and drink no wine, or you will never reach your home again." So she laid down the cup and refused to drink. On this they were angry, and a great noise arose. And a fierce, dark man stood up and said, "Whoever comes to us must drink with us." And he seized her arm and held the wine to her lips, so that she almost died of fright. But at that moment a red-haired man came up, and he took her by the hand and led her out. "You are safe for this time," he said. "Take this herb and hold it in your hand till you reach home, and no one can harm you." And he gave her a branch of a plant called the arthurlos, or known as the ground ivy. This she took and fled away along the sword in the dark night. But all the time she heard footsteps behind her in pursuit. At last she reached home and barred the door and went to bed, when a great clamor arose outside, and voices were heard crying to her, "The power we had over you is gone through the magic of the herb. But wait, when you dance again to music on the hill, you will stay with us forevermore, and none shall hinder." However, she kept the magic branch safely, and the fairies never troubled her more. But it was long and long before the sound of the fairy music left her ears with which she danced to that November night on the hillside with her fairy lover. I enjoyed that story. Quite tempting, to say the least. Our next story is called Jimmy Doyle in the Fairy Palace by Patrick Kennedy. My father was once again coming down Scola Gap on a dark night, and all at once he saw right before him the lights coming from ever so many windows of a castle, and he heard the shouts and laughing of people within. The door was wide open, and in he walked. And there, on the spot where he had often drunk a tumbler of bad beer, he found himself in a big hall, and saw the king and queen of the fairies sitting at the head of a long table, and hundreds of people, all grandly dressed, eating and drinking. The clothes they had on them were of an old fashion, and there were harpers and pipers by themselves up in a gallery, and playing the most delightful old Irish airs. There was nothing to be seen but rich silk dresses and pearls and diamonds on the gentlemen and ladies, and rich hangings on the wall and lamps blazing. The queen, as soon as she saw my father, cried out, "Welcome, Mr. Doyle. Make room there for Mr. Doyle, and let him have the best at the table. Hand Mr. Doyle a tumbler of punch that will be strong and sweet. Sit down, Mr. Doyle, and make yourself welcome." So he sat down and took the tumbler, and just as he was going to taste it, his eye fell on the man next to him, and he was an old neighbor that was dead 20 years. Says the old neighbor, "For your life, don't touch bit nor sip." The smell was very nice, but he was frightened by what the dead neighbor said, and he began to notice how ghastly some of the fine people looked when they thought he was not minding them. So his health was drunk, and he was pressed by the queen to fall to, but he had the sense to take the neighbor's advice, and only spilled the drink down between his coat and waistcoat. At last the queen called for a song, and one of the guests sang a very indecent one in Irish. He often repeated a verse of it for us, but we didn't know the sense. At last he got sleepy and recollected nothing more, only the rubbing of his legs against the bushes and the knock above our place in Camaroge, and we found him asleep next morning in the haggard, with a scent of punch from his mouth. He told us that we get his knee buckles on the path at the upper end of the knock, and there, sure enough, they were found. Heaven be his bed. Hydration break. Our next story is called The Recovered Bride by Patrick Kennedy. There was a marriage in the townland of Curragh. This town name's a little lengthy. Curragh. After the usual festivities, and when the guests were left to themselves, and were drinking to the prosperity of the bride and the bridegroom, they were startled by the appearance of the man himself rushing into the room with anguish in his looks. "Oh," cried he, "Margaret is carried away by the fairies, I'm sure." The girls were not left in the room for half a minute when I went in, and there is no more sign of her than if she were never born. Great consternation prevailed, great search was made, but no Margaret was to be found. After a night and a day spent in misery, the poor bridegroom laid down to take some rest. In a while he seemed to himself to awake from a troubled dream and look out into the room. The moon was shining in through the window, and in the middle of the slanting rays stood Margaret in her white bridal clothes. He thought to speak and leap out of the bed, but his tongue was without utterance, and his limbs were unable to move. "Do not be disturbed, my dear husband," said the appearance. "I am now in the power of the fairies, but if you only have the courage and prudence, we may be soon happy with each other again. Next Friday will be May Eve, and the whole court will ride out to the old fort after midnight. I must be there along with the rest. Sprinkle a circle of holy water and have a black haft knife with you. If you have the courage to pull me off the horse and draw me into the ring, all they can do will be useless." You must have some food for me every night on the dresser, for if I taste one mouthful with them, I will be lost to you forever. The fairies got power over me because I was only thinking of you, and did not prepare myself as I ought for the sacrament. I made a bad confession, and now I'm suffering for it. Don't forget what I have said." "Oh no, my darling," cried he, recovering his speech. But by the time he had slipped out of bed, there was no living soul in the room but himself. Till Friday night the poor young husband spent a desolate time. The food was left on the dresser overnight, and it rejoiced all hearts to find it had vanished. By morning, a little before midnight, he was at the entrance of the old wraith. He formed a circle, took his stallion within it, and kept the black haft knife ready for service. At times he was nervously afraid of losing his dear wife, and at others burning with impudence for the struggle. At last the old fort, with its dark, high, bushy fences cutting against the sky, was in a moment replaced by a palace and its court. 1,000 lights flashed from the windows, and a lofty hall entrance. Numerous torches were brandished by attendants stationed round the courtyard, and a numerous cavalcade of richly attired ladies and gentlemen was moving in the direction of the gates where he found himself standing. As they rode by him laughing and jesting, he could not tell whether they were aware of his presence or not. He looked intent at each countenance as it appeared, but it was some time before he caught sight of the dear face and figure borne along on a white, milk-white steed. She recognized him well enough, and her features now broke into a smile, now expressed deep anxiety. She was unable for the throng to guide the animal close to the ring of power, so he suddenly rushed out of his bounds, seized her in his arms, and lifted her off. Cries of rage and fury arose on every side. They were hemmed in, and weapons were directed at his head and breast to terrify him. He seemed to be inspired with superhuman courage and force, and wielding the powerful knife, he soon cleared a space around him, all seeming dismayed by the sight of the weapon. He lost no time, but drew his wife within the ring, within which none of the myriads round dared to enter. Shouts of desolation and defiance continued to fill the air for some time, but the expedition could not be delayed. As the end of the procession filed past the gate and the circle within, which the mortal pair held on each other determinedly clasped, darkness and silence fell on the old Wrath and the fields around him, and the rescued bride and her lover breathed freely. We will not detain the sensitive reader on the happy walk home, on the joy that hailed their arrival, and on the anger, all the eager gossip that occupied the townland and the 5 that surrounded it for a month after the happy rescue. Our final story for today is called The Palace and the Wrath, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. Everyone from Bunclody to Einscorthy knows the Wrath, a small circular meadow surrounded by a mound of overgrown furze bushes, the remains of an earthen fort of one of the small chiefs in the old days, between Tombrick and Munfin. Well, there was a poor, honest, quiet little creature that lived just at the pass of Glenamowan, between the hill of Coolgarrow and Kilachdarmond. His back was broken when he was a child, and he earned his bread by making cradles and bosses and chairs and beehives out of straw and briars. No one in the barony of Bantry or Scarwalsh could equal him at these. Well, he was a sober little fellow enough. But the best of us may be overtaken. He was coming from the fair of Einscorthy one fine summer evening up along the beautiful, shady road of Munfin, and when he came near a stream that bounds Tombrick, he turned into the fields to make his road short. He was singing merrily enough, but by degrees he got a little stupefied, and when he was passing the dry, grassy ditch that surrounded the rath, he felt an inclination to sit and rest himself. It is hard to sit a while and have your eyes a little glassy, and the things seeming to turn round you without falling off asleep. And asleep my poor little man of straw was in a few minutes. Things like droves of cattle, or soldiers marching, or big flakes of foam on the wooded river, were pushing on through his brain, and he thought of drums were playing a march. And when he woke, and there was a face of a steep bank that was overgrown with bushes and blackthorn, a passage was open between nice pillars, and inside was a great vaulted room, with arches crossing each other, 100 lamps hanging from the vault, and thousands of nice little gentlemen and ladies, with green coats and gowns, and red sugar-loaf caps, curled at the top like old Irish beards, dancing and singing, and nice little pipers and fiddlers perched up in the little gallery by themselves, and playing music to help out the singing. Why, thank you, my dear Lace-shroom. I had wondered if you would have an appreciation for this new outfit of mine. He was a little cowed at first, but as he found no one was taking notice of him, he stole in and sat in a corner and thought he'd never be tired looking at the fine little people figuring and cutting capers and singing. But at last he began to find the singing and music a little tedious. It was nothing but 2 short bars and 4 words, and this was the style: Ye luan, ye morth, ye luan, ye morth. The longer he looked on, the bolder he grew, and at last he shouted at the end of the verse, Augusta Haydeen. Oh, such cries of delight rose up among the merry little gentry. They began the improved song, and shouted till the vault rang. Ye luan, ye morth, ye luan, ye morth, ye luan, ye morth, Augusta Haydeen. After a few minutes, they all left off the dance and gathered round the boss maker and thanked him for improving their tune. Now, said the chief, If you wish for anything, only say the word, and if it is in our power, it must be done. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, says he, and if you would only remove this hump on my back, I'd be the happiest man in Dufry. Oh, easy done, they said. Go on with the dance, and you come along with us. So on they went with Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday too. Moonsday, Marsday, Woden'sday, burst fast. One fairy, taking their new friend to be healed, shot him in a curve to the very roof, and down he came the other side of the hall. Another gave him a shove, and up he flew back again. He felt as if he had wings, and one time, when his back touched the roof, he found a sudden delightful change in himself, and just as he touched the ground, he lost all memory of everything around him. The next morning he was awakened by the sun shining on his face from over Sylvie Beau, and he had a delightful feel down along his body, instead of the disagreeable cruth he was accustomed to. He felt as if he could go from that to the other side of the stream in one step, and he burned little daylight till he reached Glenamon. He had some trouble to persuade the neighbors of the truth of what had happened, but the wonder held only 9 days, and he had like to lose his health along with his hump, for if he only made his appearance in Ballincarney, Castle Daltrick, Ballindagan, Kilmishill, or Bouncloudy, 10 people would be inviting him to share a tumbler of punch or a quart of mulled beer. The news of the wonderful cure was talked of high and low, and even went as far as Ballynockish and Bantry, where another poor Angashore of a humpback lived. But he was very unlike the Dulfrey man in his disposition. He was as cross as a briar, and almost begrudged his right hand to help his left. His poor old aunt and a neighbor of hers set out one day, along with him, along the Doon-Cowley road, passing by Killeen and the old place of the Colcochs at Dufry Hall, till they reached Temple Shambo. Then they kept along the hilly by-road till they reached the little man's house near the pass. So they up and told their business, and he gave them a kind welcome, and explained all the ins and outs of his adventure. And the end was, the four went together in the heel of the evening to the rath, and left the little lord in his glory in the dry brown grass at the round dyke, where the others met his good fortune. The little Alcren never once thanked them for all the trouble they were taking for him. He only whimpered about being left in that lonesome place and bade them be sure to be with him at the flight of night, because he did not know what way to take from it. Why, thank you, Game Crazy. I am quite proud of this visage. At last the poor cross creature fell asleep, and after dreaming about falling down from rocks, and being held over the sea by his hump, and then that a lion had him by the same hump, and was running away with him, and then that it was put up for a target for soldiers to shoot at. The first volley they gave awoke him, and what was it but the music of the fairies in full career? The melody was the same as it was when they left him by the hive maker, and the tune and dancing was twice as good as it was the first. This is the way it went. Ye lown, ye morth, ye luan, ye morth, ye luan, ye morth, Augusta haid seen. But the new visitor had neither taste nor discretion, so when they came about the third time to the last line, he croaked out, Augusta haird yin, Augusta hain ya. Dies Jovis, dies Venris, Thursday, Friday. It was the same as the cross fiddler that finds nobody going to give him anything, and makes the harsh back screech of his bow along one of the strings. 1,000 voices cried out, Who stops our dance? Who stops our dance? And all gathered round the poor fellow. They could do nothing. He could do nothing but stare at them with his poor, cross, frightened face. And they screamed and laughed till he thought it was all over for him. But it was not over with him. Bring down that hump, says the king. And before you could kiss your hand, it was clasped on. And as fast as the knocker of Newgate over the poor over hump. The music was over now, the lights went out, and the poor creature lay till morning in a nightmare. And there were 2 women found him at daybreak, more dead than alive. It was a dismal return they had to Ballynockrish, and the moral of my story is that you should never drive till you first try the virtue of leading. Oh, hello, Armored Horns. Yes, very much so. This is my ball gown for the VTuber Midnight Masquerade. But with that, my dears, unfortunately I have to call this the end of our reading time. I'm unfortunately on a bit of a tight schedule right now. And although I was supposed to collab with some other Fae friends, unfortunately a family matter has popped up. and I'll be unable to join them. However, I will remind you all that my debut is on All Hallows Eve. If you wish to see me in my full glamour, that will be the place to be. Oh yes, Armored Horns, very much so. And it is a shame that you only popped up now, but I greatly appreciate any moment that anyone spends with me. You could be anywhere in the world, yet you choose to lay eyes and ears upon what I have to say, and that truly means the world to me. But with all of that said, a reminder that tomorrow at 5 p.m. CST, I will be playing another game for Toothy Tuesdays. And that game will be Absolov. Although I am not unfamiliar to the game, this will be my first playthrough of it. And it could be viewed as somewhat of a sequel to Unforgiving: A Northern Hymn, the game I played through last week. And if you miss my stream for the horror game, it will be uploaded on Friday for everyone to enjoy, as will all of my Toothy Tuesdays. But until then, my dears, I'm afraid I must bid you all adieu. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and may this day bring you some joy, peace, and light. Until our next meeting, my dears. Goodbye.